If you're a leader with ADHD, you probably wondered, is my brain helping or hurting me when I communicate? In this episode, I show you how ADHD can become a real communications edge, not something to hide, but something to leverage. And my guest for that is Andy J. Pizza. He's a speaker, author, and the host of the long-running podcast, Creative Pep Talk. He spent years studying storytelling, creativity, and public speaking with ADHD and how to turn difference into influence. If you have ADHD or you're working with people with ADHD, this episode is for you. Do neurodivergent people communicate differently?
Yeah, I definitely think they do. Now, I can speak to that from firsthand experience as an ADHD person, but also autistic people and dyslexic people. Every neurodivergent person I know, I really recognize how differently they communicate. It's very obvious. There's a lot of different flavors too. Even within the ADHD community, it might manifest in a really different way. The most obvious version of it that I recognize in myself is that we tend to sort of speak backwards and get to the point right at the end, which for the longest time kind of made me feel like, as I was growing up, I was like, man, I suck at communicating. I don't know how to talk to people. People are always like, get to the point. And then it wasn't until I got really obsessed with storytelling and then also comedy and joke writing and all that. And I realized like, oh, this is an impulse. This is a creative impulse. So if you read about like how to construct a joke, one of the biggest rules is make sure that the punchline is as close to the final word as possible. And so I think when I'm talking to people, I'm aware of what the juiciest piece of this information is. And I'm going to try to, reconstruct how I tell it so that it's as far into the communication as possible, which if you're a storyteller, that's great. Your audience feels tension. They're leaning in. They're interested. But if you're speaking face to face with somebody, they might be impatient. That tension turns into, hey, I can just interrupt and be like, what is it? Tell me what you're trying to talk about. So yeah, I definitely recognize that neurodivergent people just naturally communicate differently.
What other flavors, other points did you observe in your work and doing it yourself, being a professional communicator, so to speak, professional creative, but also people you work with and have in your community?
So my wife and I write books together and write picture books, and we communicate, I think, very different to neurotypical people, but also very different to each other. And it started where we were having like fights and arguments when we try to make something because we really want to go at it completely opposite way. I want to start with super big picture, top down. I want to think like, what is the point of this story? Where are we going? Then refract that into 3 scenes, then refract that into some of the language, then get really interested in word choice. Where for it to come alive, she needs to feel like, let's start at the bottom. Let's start with the details. Let's make it come to life. Let's make it rich. And at first, when we didn't recognize these are just different ways to come at it, and they're both valuable, they help it be very well-rounded, it would look like, no, why are you thinking about the details? We're not talking about the details. We're talking about the point. And so I recognize even there that there's just very different ways of approaching it. And I think that's super valuable when it comes to kind of embracing your authentic voice. I think people are aware of when you are speaking from your heart. And so I think you need to, if you go look for examples of how to communicate, I think you need to recognize something about, oh, I see myself in this person that has cracked how to do this well. So you need to kind of allow because every time I hear like public speaking experts talk about this, there's a lot of, I've heard you talk about this actually, and I really respected what you said. A lot of public speaking advice is, script every word, know every single thing, very like TED Talk speak, which I think there's a time and place for that. And there's also a personality for that, for sure. But for me, I lose all my flavor if I do that. And I have gone through the process of really scripting, really rehearsing, doing it 30 times before I do it. So it's not just out of a laziness that I want to wing some of it. But it's really like, oh, I want to be in my heart. I want to be in my self. I want to be myself on stage. And that is the most attractive my message can be. Yeah.
How did you find out that you have ADHD?
What's funny is like when I didn't get diagnosed until I was an adult, but I had a lot of clues along the way. So I remember even like first grade, we were doing this open gym after school where it's just kids are free to like run around and play games and whatever. And I was running around with this kid, Jeremy, and he was the only kid that could keep up with me in terms of energy and silliness and all that. And I'm thinking, this guy gets it. This guy's awesome. And then he's like, hey, hold on a second. I got to go to the office and get my meds. And I was like, what? Are you sick, man? And he's like, no, I'm hyper. And I was like, oh. I didn't think that was something that needed to be medicated. I thought it was just being awesome. I thought we were just having a blast, man. And so I remember then even thinking like, if he needs medicine for that, like what's going on with me? And that I had a lot of experiences like that throughout school and into my adulthood, but I really didn't want to open that door. I think part of it was it's very hereditary. Most like 97% get it from one of their parents. I knew that if I got it from one of my parents, it was from my mom. And I've spoke a lot about this in like my talks and in my podcast of the damaged sort of delicate relationship I have with my mom. And so I spent a long time thinking I'm not even going to open that door because watching her, she struggled. She's still alive, but her life was just such a struggle, so many disasters, and it was just really painful for the people around her. And so by the time I was like 17, I was thinking, I want to be the opposite of this person. Like when I was little, I loved being creative and weird like her. I thought it was a huge blessing. I embraced it. As I got older, I'm like, oh, people like this just suffer. I don't want to be like this. And so I spent like the late teens all the way through a lot of my 20s really trying to be the opposite of her, really thinking like I want to do everything she's not doing. And then I ran into another one of those examples of someone who had ADHD. It was a public speaker actually, or it was a talk. And I just couldn't ignore all the signs. And at first I started to like read about it, dive into it. I was feeling shame, overwhelm, I couldn't deny all of these things. And it wasn't until I started to get to a little bit of a positive psychology lens that wasn't as like pathologizing of the neurodivergent lens, which is really the idea of neurodivergence embraces different types of brains. Like that term even gets at that.
Yeah, I guess, your perspective was it's a disadvantage.
Yes.
But you also alluded to the fact that self-awareness and self-acceptance are really the key to turn it into a strength, a superpower even.
Exactly. And I think, and I want to touch on that superpower idea in just a second, but as I got deeper into it and I started to see like, oh, there's a different way to frame this. You can see this as maybe not a superpower, but realize like there's nothing wrong with you. It's just the system that was set up wasn't set up for you. And as times change, as the economy changes, as the environment changes, sometimes you're going to be the ideal human for this situation. You just were born into an era of post-industrial age that is not very conducive to the way that you are. And so there are real struggles. That's why I do feel lots of days where I feel like this is a superpower, but I want to be clear that there are lots of other days when I'm dealing with bureaucracy and taxes and all this stuff where I'm like, I feel like this is just a super weakness. This just feels like life on hard mode. And so as I started to realize that there was this different way of approaching it, and that there were ways in which you could lean into it, you actually get better results if you lean into it rather than trying to escape it. I started to see it very differently. And I even started to see my mom differently. And I realized like, oh, all the things that she struggled with or her failures, they weren't who she was. It was her trying to be something she wasn't. Those are the things that she failed at. And I started to feel like maybe I could be more like her than she let herself be. And so that really was a huge shift. And so after I found that, it's still a journey. It's still like there's so much, it's an everyday thing to remember that just because the way that I am doesn't naturally fit into the world that I was born into, doesn't mean that it's wrong, and doesn't mean that there aren't real advantages to being someone like me.
It feels that embracing it is the best way forward, right? Rather than masking or, trying to suppress it or denying it.
I absolutely agree. And I do like to recognize in myself that masking is a coping mechanism that I'm grateful for. There are neurodivergent people that I've met that really masking isn't even an option for them, and that they're not as able to employ that strategy when needed. And so I am grateful that there are times when I can pass as neurotypical and kind of get by. And I'm happy that I have that kind of in my wheelhouse. But at the same time, I have to be really careful with opening that door, putting that mask on, because it's kind of like the mask with Jim Carrey, where it's once you have it on, it's hard to take. It wants to cling to your face. I go through life, really almost every interaction, coaching myself prior to it, being like, hey, I know that the path of least resistance here is to just try to fit in. But if you do that, it will start to overwhelm you with anxiety, because you know that it's not real. You know you can only keep it up for so long. And so for me, it's much more of an effort to, everywhere I go, try to show up authentically, knowing that some people will not like that, but that the people that do will connect with me in an authentic and real way.
The reason I became interested in this topic, or various reasons. One, it runs in the family on my side. It also is overrepresented, specifically ADHD, among driven entrepreneurs, right? The people who go all in on one thing that really fascinates them.
That.
So yeah, it's fascinating. So I deal with it quite a lot. And recently, I was giving a workshop in a larger group, and one person stayed behind. She didn't want to ask the question in front of everyone else, all their colleagues, but then said, look, I have ADHD. What do you recommend to me? Because in the way we present and speak and communicate here in the office, it's always conducive to my thinking, my preferences. So what would you have I realized I didn't have a good answer. What would you have told her?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple things that make being an entrepreneur really attractive to a creative person or into an ADHD person. And I think it's that I think the one that gets represented a lot is this idea of freedom. But then once you've been an entrepreneur for any significant amount of time, you know that it's there's a type of freedom to it, but it's also a different type of jail. It can be very all-consuming, very overwhelming. You can really, instead of one boss, you have 30 bosses. Like, it's with all the clients you have or whatever it is. And so freedom is an aspect of it. I like the ability to, and I'm doing this ADHD communicating thing where I'm going to get to the point in a minute, but I'm going to start at the top and work back down. But I think that that's a common idea. Like, oh, they want to be entrepreneurs so they can pick and choose what they do. Yes, I like having autonomy. It is really important to me to be able to choose not what I do, but how I go about doing it. That really does matter. So I feel like that's one aspect. If there is any, like when it comes to habit formation even, the conventional wisdom or the neurotypical wisdom is if you do the same thing the same way, it will become automatic. You won't have to think about it. For a lot of neurotypical people, they don't have an automatic gear. They're like a manual car. They have to keep their hands busy. They have to keep engaged. They're all on, right? You can't just do it the same way, do the same thing the same way, and it'll be automatic. For me, I realized I've become a runner where I run 3 miles a few times a week. And the only way that I've been able to maintain that for the past 8 years is do the same thing, which is run 3 miles, do it in a different way. So sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon. I always have to keep the playlist interesting. I have to spend extra time on that. I have to think I'm going to go a new route. I have to keep it interesting. So maybe there's one piece where it's like, you have to realize any amount of autonomy you can get on how you go about it will benefit you. That's a huge thing. And you can really negotiate that with a reasonable boss. And you still have limitations, everybody does, but and even get weird with it if you have to. I have wrote books in the bathtub. I have written them on walks on my phone. I have voice messaged them. Like, I've done everything I had to do to get something achieved. And I have to not judge how I do it. Sometimes my wife is British and her parents will come live with us for 2 weeks at a time, about twice a year. And we love them and they're awesome. But sometimes I have to work during that time. And my mother-in-law will watch my process and she'll be like, are you taking another bath today? Like, didn't you already do it?
I heard about you that you have your best ideas in the bathtub. Is that true?
Yeah, I do. And you know what? Like, my mom used to take a bath every day and take a short nap every day. And I remember thinking, like, I don't know anybody that does that, and no other adults in my life do that. And I slipped into very similar patterns. And it wasn't until later that I heard of the science of what a hot bath does to your brain, what the sensory deprivation might do. Also, things like a short nap, what that can do to reset your brain if you're ADHD. And so I had to trust myself on a bunch of those things, not judge myself, not worry so much about how people judge me for how I get stuff done. So that's part of it. The other part of it is, like I said, I think the freedom aspect is the obvious reason why an ADHD person might move towards something like being an entrepreneur. But I think the other piece, it goes beyond that, where it's about meaning. There's something about, I don't know exactly if this is an ADHD thing or if it's just a me thing, but it seems like I see this in other ADHD people and neurodivergent people, where we have a harder time abstracting value. And what I mean by that is, I have a hard time connecting my time to dollars, to paying bills, to then my kids. So I'm doing this thing right here. And the only reason I'm doing it is 4 degrees of separation to the meaning of why I'm doing that. There's something about that that doesn't make sense to me. And so for me, a different approach is, sometimes I have to do something and it's mostly just for money so that I can feed my children. Yes, that's true. But the approach is different, where everything I try to do is a whole self thing. I want to be bought in as much as possible. That to me is what's attractive about being an entrepreneur or finding a job at a business that's very mission driven. I need to know that what I'm doing, I'm all in. I'm not refracted in a bunch of parts of myself that's like, okay, half of me wants to do this, half of me thinks this is the worst thing for humanity. That doesn't work for me. And in fact, it's so true that sometimes people will say, hey, why did you start that podcast? And the first answer that I go to is like the strategy of like, oh, I thought this would help me sell books and do this and get in that, whatever. But I take for granted the fact that people won't know that for me to do anything, I have to be sold out on it on a deep human level first. And so if I skip that part, it sounds like, oh, this guy is just a strategy guy. All he cares about is like the end goal or whatever. And really, no, that's not true. I don't even consider investing tons of time and energy in something if I'm not sold out to it. If I don't think this is good for people, this is good for me, this is good, and so those are the 2 areas that it's kind of a long-winded way to answer that. But those are the 2 answers. Like, one, find any freedom in how you do things will help you. And then the other is how can you get your whole self on board with what you're doing?
One aspect that comes to mind and that I also suggested to this person I mentioned is that maybe you can tag team right?
Yeah.
And you see this with founders, for instance. We have basically the CEO who's very extroverted, goes out, talks about the business, the chief storyteller. And then you have the sort of CTO or COO, the internal, the domestic, who focus on the details, the spreadsheets, and making sure everything's running smoothly. The same as when let's say you're presenting in a business, it can be the ADHD person, it can be, someone who's very much into the details of the plan. And one person does the kickoff, the inspiration, the big picture goals, and the other person takes over and presents the detailed plan.
Yeah.
That can also be a very, because we can't be everything. No one can be everything to all people all the time. So I'm a big believer in teaming up with people who complement you and achieve even more. And everyone can really play to their strengths.
I absolutely love that. Completely agree. It's great advice. I just want to add one thing. And it's that you can only do that well if you truly value yourself. If you don't, and I'm speaking from experience, it wasn't until I'm almost 40, it was probably after 35, that I started to realize that what I'm bringing to the table is unique and valuable. This idea that I could see a vision, think from the top down, be creative, show up with energy, charisma, whatever it is. This is essential to the success of a business. And if prior to that, 20 to 35, I'm thinking, okay, I'm adding some fun jazz to this thing. And this person I'm partnering with is doing all the important stuff, the number crunching and, whatever. They're both valuable. But what I didn't realize was I was selling myself short over and over again. I was deferring to them as the real business people. And it was getting me into all kinds of bad scenarios where I'm giving too much of the business away. I'm not valuing what I do. I'm not speaking up for myself. It's so essential. It wasn't until I started to really dive into the business world, realize, a lot of top entrepreneurs are neurodivergent. They are like this. And then even more so realize this is a huge aspect of what business is. If you talk to people about what's business, the first thing they think are numbers, taxes, accounting. I'm like, okay, half of that can be automated, literally, even before AI, right? That's not business. That's a piece of business. It's an important piece of business, but business is about people and ideas and being flexible and being visionary and all of that harder to pin down stuff. And I think if you don't enter with self-value and realize just because this comes natural to me doesn't mean that it's easy for anybody else, doesn't mean that it's not valuable. And I think that's really essential in partnerships.
Are you sick and tired of spending 8 hours preparing for a 1-hour presentation? You're not alone. That's why I created my tactical guide, 50 presentation hacks. It's for free. Grab it in the show notes. Do you think that neurodivergent CEOs are the future in the age of AI? Because everything else can be automated pretty much.
I mean, yeah. And I actually think this is an interesting point because I come from the creative world. I'm an illustrator. I think about AI a lot, probably way more than I wish that I did. But one aspect that I find really compelling about the future of humanity within work and culture is that, yes, the robots will know the rules and they will know the rules better than we know the rules. That's just so true. But the interesting, annoying part of doing business is that you're not doing work for robots. You're not creating products for robots. And guess what? They don't care about the rules. Here's the thing. Yes, a robot knows color theory in a way that I can't even imagine. Yet it knows that it's pleasing to the human eye to have purple and yellow together. It knows that. But I don't think that it will be able to have a taste for or an intuition about is when we're sick of having our eyes pleased and we actually want them to hurt. We want them to bleed. We want neon green, neon red. Let's go punk. Let's make it painful. Yeah. It won't know when it's time to flip. And I think that right there requires the human palate and your own taste and your sense of what do we want next? Because sometimes it's something that doesn't feel good, that doesn't make sense. And so I do think one of the things that all this AI stuff has made me feel is real excitement and hope that we're going to finally realize what humanity brings to the table. It's going to increase our value of the unique, the novel, the deep, the connection. I think that it's going to make all of those things luxury. And so I feel like you're right. We are going to have, I think, even more need for the more chaotic type of innovation that only comes from weird thinkers.
Weird thinkers, exactly, who leave the trodden path, because at the end of the day, AI models are based on existing information and existing data, and all the data comes from the past. And, if you're in design, but also judgments about the future. I mean, the great CEOs, they get a few big calls right.
Yeah.
And that's, no AI, yes, it can help with the market analysis and, the pros and cons and all of that good stuff. But what you at the end of the day have to do, take a tough decision probably, or a courageous decision that will hopefully pay out in a few years' time, that will safeguard the future of the business.
Absolutely. I think when I think about creativity, which I think is essential to running a business, leading a business, I think that the reason why there are no golden rules of creative work is because as soon as it's a rule, it ceases to be creative. Right? As soon as it's like, this is the right way, that's no longer the creative way. You have to do the wrong way. And that'll feel good for a different reason. And I think that the same is true in business. Even as AI develops and it gets super macro in its ability to read patterns and even think, okay, after purple and yellow, we need red and green. It'll figure that out too. But even then, we're going to want the wrong thing. We're going to want the thing that nobody expected, no one saw coming. And so I think that, you're absolutely right. We're going to need those types of leaders that can speak, again, authentically. I think for me, one of the big through lines with everything I do is this idea of taste. And I've spent a lot of time trying to explain it because it's very clear to me, but maybe it doesn't. I'm almost trying to reinvent the word or imbue it with different meaning, where yes, taste is about what you like and you don't like, but it's also your sensitivity. There are people that have hundreds of taste buds, and then there are people that have thousands, and those people are called super tasters. They're super sensitive. They can really pick out a recipe and reverse engineer what made it. And not just that, also think like, what would I want next after that? After that salt, I want some sweet or some umami.
I wish I had that.
What's that?
I wish I had that.
Well, it's tricky too, because a super taster can be really picky. And I think a lot of people in the arts, even I'm an artist. And sometimes I'll meet somebody, or I would talk to my grandma, and they're like, "You're going to love my neighbor. They're a painter." And I'm like, I don't know. I'm actually super picky. I'm very snobby about art in my own little way because I have a sensitive palate. The reason I bring that up is it's true in art, but it's also true in business. I think the entrepreneurs that have the biggest breakthrough were solving a problem that they had, that they felt. They were like, oh, this is not quite right. And it was their own palate, their own sensitivity, and listening to that.
So they have more taste buds than other entrepreneurs, metaphorically speaking. Interesting. Yeah, and the irritation leads to innovation.
Yes.
I love that. So some have more business taste buds and can really savor the problem and therefore try to create the solution.
Almost all the innovation comes from, I have a sense from my own lived experience that this needs to change. This needs to be fixed. And I think that tapping into your own authentic taste and perspective is really key to that.
Yeah. A lot of leaders are trying to become more creative, especially now as they see what AI is doing to sort of standardize tasks.
Yeah.
What can they do? Is this trainable? And what can they do to become more creative? Bathtub is one thing we heard about it, but I know you talk about, your podcast is called the Creative Pep Talk. So you talk about this a lot, but for leaders listening, what can they do to become more creative?
Yeah, the first thing I think is to just realize that there's an aspect of creativity that isn't even effort. And when you realize you are creative, you don't have to try to be creative. A lot of what's stopping your creativity is you're getting in the way of your own perspective. It goes back to what we talked about earlier, this idea of masking, trying to fit in. That's what's stopping you from standing out. If you would let yourself see things as you really see them and open yourself up to communicate that point of view is creative. One of the things I like to point out of proof of everyone's creativity is just the fact that all of us, to some degree, dream every night, whether you realize it or not. Dreams are incredible on all kinds of levels to me, but mainly to the fact that they speak to that you are creative in your sleep. That's how effortless it is. Every single night, without any effort, instantaneously, you come up with a cast of characters, a problem, and tell a story. And it's wildly inventive and weird. And it all comes from your subconscious without effort. And so, to me, dreams are just this really tangible sign that everyone's creative, everyone's capable of creating movies in their head while they're asleep. That's how creative you are. And so I think part of it is just like, okay, you are creative. You are creative. You might not draw, you might say, I can't even draw a stick figure, like classic people that say they have no creativity. That's true, but you do create movies in your head every single night. And I that's part of it. That's the first part.
Yeah. And you can train your storytelling taste buds, right? You can train, spotting stories. How do you spot stories?
So my favorite question that starts to unearth stories that you've already lived, which is kind of what they get at when they're saying, write what you know, right? And when you're communicating, telling stories is the most effective way to communicate. And I know, my dad was a corporate accountant. He ended up doing lots of leadership, lots of public speaking, always leaning into storytelling. So it doesn't matter if you're not a picture book author, it matters to be able to tell your own stories. And I think my favorite question that I've ever heard that really gets to this comes from a guy named Eric Newsom, who's a podcast expert. He worked at NPR and Audible and all these different podcasting companies. And he would say, if you're in trouble in an interview and you're like, I don't know what to ask this person, ask them this question. What do people like you, like let's say you're a podcaster, you're talking to a podcaster, what do podcasters get wrong about podcasting? Or talking to an illustrator, what do illustrators get wrong about illustration? Or a leader, what do leaders get wrong about leadership? The reason why so he tells us that as like a get out of trouble quick fix. And it definitely works. It's really powerful. But I think the reason why it works so well is it gets to the core of what a story is. So a story is a character change. They start this way at the beginning of the story, they end a different way because of what they went through. And when you talk about what do illustrators get wrong, the first thing you're going to think of is, what did I get wrong at the start? That's the story. That's how you went from wrong to right in this perspective. So that question is the one that I always start with. What is something that you really, really got wrong in this area that you're trying to tell a story about? And then that's your start. And then what you figured out later, that's your end. And then the thing that changed you, the thing that got in the way of what you wanted at the start, gave you what you needed. That's your story.
Mm-hmm. A story is a tale of transformation, and Matthew Dixon's definition. And I love this question because it triggers us to spot the story and tell the story, without, I have to construct one and here's the framework. I love my storytelling frameworks, don't get me wrong, I nerd out on those. But to get you started, because you probably had this conversation as well with many people, you ask people, tell a story, and they're like, I don't know. As long as if you don't give them something to work with, ask a question they find easy to answer, they almost freeze. It's like, I'm not a storyteller. Say, look, a 2-year-old understands a story. You had to go to school and university for 20 years to learn accounting. It just shows, that storytelling is much more natural for us humans compared to numbers, logic.
Absolutely true. There's 2 other things I like about it. One is, when you say tell story, I think part of the challenge there is we don't really know what a story is. There's a million opinions about what a story is. And yes, this is just one definition of a story. And like the neon green, neon red thing, there are lots of ways in which we want a story that does nothing what a story has ever done. We like things that break the rules. I'm into that too. But it really helps to start with realizing a traditional basic story is a transformation of a character, just like you said. So that's the first part that I like. And the other part that I like is it really hacks our negativity bias to say, what did you get wrong? Rather than if I say, what's something that you know for sure? You're like, whoa, I have no idea. But if I say, what did you get wrong? You're like, oh, I can tell you, I got this wrong. And the other side of that is something you have learned and earned the hard way and know for sure. So I like that it kind of taps into that too.
Love it. And then the ending is the opposite of the beginning, right? You got this wrong, and then the ending is you get this right. Customer story, same thing. Customer unhappy, solution comes in, customer happy.
Yes.
Leadership story, big problem faced by leadership, overcoming obstacles, everyone's happy in the end. So this is how, most basic elements of storytelling, right? You need protagonists, you need obstacles, you need high stakes, and then there's a transformation. I love that.
Can I add one bit? This is just because I'm also a story nerd who can just nerd out on this all day. But it might give people that want to construct stories a little bit of little extra tools in your utility belt. So I think stories of transformation is kind of 101 story. And then if you want to go to the next level, you can think about how, you start here, you end here. In the middle is something that got in the way of what you wanted and then ultimately gave you what you needed. So this is an interesting thing. As you go to tell the story, you're going to talk about here's the thing that stopped me when I was going at it wrong. That thing is going to give you what you need. Okay, it's a little bit more advanced and we can speak to that for a long time, but it's juicy to me. It's just interesting how it's really just saying what the Stoics say, which is the obstacle was the way. The thing that got in the way ended up becoming the way.
It turned up because that includes lots of surprises, which of course is what stories drive on, right? 100%. Because our brain lights up when you have a surprise, like boom, we want to know what it is.
Yes.
Is it a threat? Is it opportunity? We love surprises.
We love that. Oh, how did the thing that got in the way become the way? How did this thing that was stopping me actually help me go? The easiest example of that I always give comes from Toy Story. Buzz Lightyear stops him from getting what he wants, which is Woody wants to be number one, but it ends up giving him what he needs, which was a friend. It's this kind of thing.
Yes. Love it. Let me take a quick left turn here. I wanted to ask you if, let's say, I have members of my team who are neurodivergent. How should I communicate with them? What do I have to think about? And keep in mind, maybe I don't know it, right? Maybe it's not out in the open, and maybe just suspecting something, or maybe my usual communication style doesn't land with that person.
I think the biggest thing, this touches on something we said earlier, is making the goals really clear. Being like, this is what the expectation is. This is what you need to get done. And then letting them have the freedom to get it done how they need it to get done. The more freedom in the approach gives them everything that they need to do it their way. And the way that they do it might seem very foreign and bizarre to people on the outside. And so that's the first thing is, can you be clear with expectations? And the second thing speaks to another thing we spoke about, which was why entrepreneurship is maybe attractive to a lot of folks that are neurodivergent. Can you speak to the why of this thing? If you can do those two things, if you can say, this is what we need to do, crystal clear, and then back it up with, this is why this matters. I've worked out why this matters, why this is going to change things, why you doing it's going to be powerful. All of those things are going to give them the freedom to do it the way they need to do it, and also the motivation to show up fully as themselves and give themselves to the problem, because they're like, I get why we're doing this. I'll give you just a quick metaphor about that. So I have a new book called Mysterious Things. It's a picture book. It's really about why we want to learn things. So it's about how learning isn't about solving the mystery, it's about engaging with it. And the reason we made that book was because when I was a kid going through school, I felt like every class was like, hey, before you were born, we figured everything out. We put it in this book. Here's all the answers. And I'm like, boring. Why do I care? No, I hate this. This sucks. And I think of it like, it was like they were trying to teach me chords on a guitar, but I'd never heard music before. And I was like, why would I?
And it's not even true. We don't have all the answers.
Right. It's not even true. No, it's not even true. But what I didn't realize was that if you learn these chords, if you learn this stuff, you can get to the juicy stuff. You can get to the mystery. You can get to the point of learning, which is to participate and engage with culture and what's happening and what we're doing next. That's really what you're here to do, is to do the next thing. And there's work to be done. And so for me, that's what telling the why does. It's like, you're not just learning, why are we learning what an equilateral triangle is, which is what it feels like to be at work often. You're like, here, fill in this spreadsheet. You're like, why do we need this? Who cares? And so I think understanding the why feels very important to, I think, a lot of neurodivergent people.
It was also, in my experience, allowing them to work on projects that excite them is also a win-win, right? Yeah. Because you just get so much more out of them and they're much more happier, they're more engaged. Forcing them to work on projects they're not excited about is probably, that's a lose-lose probably. So being mindful, yes, that is true for everyone to some extent, but especially people with an interest-based attention system.
When I'm working with someone who is neurodivergent, I think a lot about what you just said, which is, which of the problems that I have do I know will get this person moving? Because what I know about them is, if they start moving, they are like an unstoppable object. They will bust through everything. If they are bought into this, if they're interested, if they're curious, that these are hyper curious people, hyper focused people when you give them the right thing. And I think you're totally spot on with that.
Wow. Thank you, Andy. Your work's so important.
Thanks.
What about your books? Except Mystical Things is coming out. We should probably mention these are not leadership books, right? I gave your book, DJ Baby, to a friend's 2-year-old last weekend for a birthday, and she loved it because you can play with it. It's like turntables. It's amazing. So just to know. So if you have children or, you're invited to a children's birthday party, perfect gifts. But say a few words about your books, Andy.
Yeah. So I've made a handful of picture books. The latest one's called Mysterious Things. If you want to check it out, you can go to invisiblethings.co. That's part of the world that they're part of. And you can learn more about that. A lot of the picture books are meant to be, we have a lot of, obviously, teachers, parents, librarians that buy these up and give them to their kids. But we also have a lot of people that just appreciate art that are into it and ideas. So if that's you're welcome to. And if you're an adult with no kids and you're not interested in the art of that, you can always check out my podcast, Creative Pep Talk. Like we've talked about here, everybody needs creativity. And we try to make that show for basically anybody in a creative rut. And we talk through mindset shifts, best practices, and give you an actionable takeaway in every episode that you can go just do something simple that helps you be more creative.
Big shout out to Creative Pep Talk and your community as well. My wife's a member, so we'll see you next week, I think. Cool. This is always my final question. What's your best piece of communications advice?
My best piece of communication advice is, before you go communicate, get really real with how you're feeling in that moment. I always have a little bit of time set aside at the start of a talk, maybe a minute, maybe 2. And I never decide what it is I'm going to say in that moment until I'm in the space in front of the people. Now, you can't always do this, but you can at least do it with yourself. You can at least drop in and say, okay, how am I feeling? How does it feel to be a part of this group of people? Because you're also a part of it. You're not just speaking to it. If you can do that, you will become present in the moment. There's nothing like presence. You notice this when people are not present. One of the ways this shows up is when someone's doing a talk or in front of a group and something chaotic is happening and they're not addressing it. They're just in robot mode and there's a baby screaming or there's a fire alarm or there's, a piece of technology is not working and they're just like pretending like everything's cool. You will lose an audience so quick because they know you're not here. We're here. Yeah. You're asking us to be here and listen to this and you're not here. So for me, that's the top thing. Every single time I get in front of a group, I think I need to drop in, need to speak to myself of like, what does it feel like to be here? What does it feel like to be part of this group? And then sometimes when it's appropriate, I'll even start with, okay, let me acknowledge how it feels to be here. Let me acknowledge something in the room. This is why stand-up comedians always start with, hey, it's great to be in Columbus. You know what I loved was the bar over there, crazy people over there. Like there's something about it that just says, hey, I'm here. I'm literally here in this space. That's the gift of communication. And you can do it I do it on Zoom too. I try to acknowledge like, oh, something weird about what it's like to be talking to faces on Zoom. To me, that's like the most important thing to remember.
It's a really good place to start and develop the skill, right? On Zoom, rather than the big audience, which could be quite scary for people. So, I should freestyle the first minute. I'd rather, be clear about my introduction.
Yeah, right.
Perfect. Andy, this was so good, so fun, and so useful. Big fan of your work and appreciate all the good work you're doing. And if you're interested in the subject, check Andy out. Andy J. Pizza, Creative Pep Talk, and wonderful picture books. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching. If you like this episode, please subscribe to the Speak Like a CEO channel. It means the world to me, and it helps us keep bringing you world-class insights and guests.